This is the brief on the disappearance of the Western tradition and the roots of modern confusion. So, we're looking at Professor Andreas Kinneging's analysis of why, everything feels so disorienting right now. His argument? It's because we've basically just cut ourselves off from our own history. Okay, so there are really three key things you need to grasp about this huge shift. First, for the first time in over 2,000 years, the West has severed ties with what he calls the Great Western Tradition. Now, this tradition was a massive foundation built on two huge pillars. You've got Greek philosophy, Plato and Aristotle, and on the other hand, Christian theology. And that combo, it was the bedrock of our culture, right up until the mid-20th century. Second, so what filled that vacuum? Well, two big modern ideas. One is this belief in nonstop technological progress, and the other, a really intense focus on the self. The problem, Kinneging says, is that this obsession with progress made us think that just because science was advancing, all ancient wisdom was suddenly worthless. And that led straight to this idea of self-fulfillment, which he argues is often just a fancy way of talking about plain old egocentrism. And finally, he argues that the old tradition, it actually offers a much more realistic picture of human nature. A better anthropology, you could say. He thinks his ancient wisdom is way better than modern social sciences, which he pretty much calls a failed project. Why? Because it gives us the language to understand our own flaws and to aim for something bigger, what's good and true and noble. So, to make sense of today's confusion, the argument is we have to look backward, not forward, to the wisdom we left behind.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling something that really gets to the heart of why our world, the contemporary world, can feel so, chaotic, maybe even rootless and fragmented. You've asked us to look for the structural reasons behind it all, and the analysis we have today from our source is, I have to say, extraordinarily powerful.
That's right. We're looking at the work of Professor Andreas Kinneging, who's a legal philosopher, and his work gives this incredible, sweeping historical diagnosis.
And the main idea is?
His central thesis is, it's simple, but it's also pretty staggering. He says the confusion we're all feeling isn't just because of shifting politics or new tech.
Right.
It's because Western civilization has, for the first time in more than 2,000 years, completely disconnected from the very foundation it was built on.
So, okay, let's be clear. This isn't just about a swing from left to right or back again.
Not at all.
We're talking about a fundamental tectonic plate shift. His analysis is basically saying that the pillars that held up Western culture for 2 millennia have collapsed, and what's left behind is this huge cultural and ethical vacuum.
Exactly. It's a claim that really demands we slow down and look at the sources of this crisis. So our mission today is to take you through Kinneging's map of this great unraveling.
Okay, so we'll try to understand what exactly we lost and then explore the logical and sometimes, frankly, absurd conclusions of the modern ideas that came to replace it.
That's the plan.
Right. To really get a handle on the unraveling, I guess we have to start with what held everything together in the first place.
We have to. Kinneging's argument starts way back, around 500 BC, and he says it runs all the way up to the middle of the 20th century.
So a very long time.
A very long time.
Yeah.
And during that period, he says, Western culture, intellectually, socially, politically, it was dominated by just two monolithic forces.
Twin pillars, he calls them.
The twin pillars. So pillar number one is Greek philosophy. And Kinneging is very specific here. He's talking about the foundational thinking of Plato and Aristotle.
So this is where we get our ideas of logic, virtue, purpose, how to think about the state, all of that.
All of that. The entire intellectual toolkit, really. And then the second pillar is, of course, Christianity.
And this isn't just about, going to church.
No, not at all. It's the whole vast, complex body of Christian theology and faith that provided the moral framework, the cosmology, really the ultimate meaning for why we're here.
I think a lot of us grow up thinking of these two as being in opposition, Athens versus Jerusalem, reason versus faith.
Right, that's the common narrative.
Hey.
But Kinneging insists that the real strength of the West, its unique power, was in how they were eventually synthesized.
And that's a core part of his argument.
It's absolutely foundational for him. He asserts that when you really study how these two forces interact, you take Plato's idea of the good, Aristotle's incredibly realistic understanding of virtue, and then you filter all of that through Christian theology. What you get is a view of humanity and the world that is far more realistic, more robust than anything modern society has come up with.
Even with all our modern science.
Even with all of our modern science. That's his claim. It's bold, I know. But he points to the longevity of this thing. He says, look, these pillars started to come under attack during the Enlightenment in the 17th, 18th centuries.
But they didn't just collapse overnight.
Not even close. They stayed culturally dominant for hundreds of years after that, which raises the question, why were they so resilient?
Yeah, why?
Because they were just completely baked into the social fabric. And to see it in action, he gives this really concrete example. He says, just look at a country like the Netherlands in, say, 1950.
Okay, so what did it look like in 1950?
The scene was one of just deep cultural grounding. The vast majority of people were, at the very least, culturally Christian.
So even if they weren't in church every single Sunday?
Right. Their moral compass, their assumptions about how society should work, even just the rhythm of their daily lives, it was all fundamentally shaped by Christian values.
And this wasn't just a private thing in people's homes, it was public.
It saturated the public square. Kinneging points to the political parties, even groups you'd think of as secular, like the Dutch socialists often call themselves Christian socialists.
Or their ideas about solidarity and helping the poor were just secular versions of Christian ethics.
Exactly, and he has this amazing specific example. The VVD, which is the main liberal party, in its very first foundational program, this is 1948, it explicitly says that Dutch society is based on Christian values and norms.
Wow, so that wasn't a controversial statement, that was just the consensus.
It was the baseline reality. And then you have the elite, the people running the government, the military, business, the universities.
What were they like?
They were classically formed. This means they were steeped in the Greek and Roman classics. They read Plato, Cicero, Aristotle, often in the original Latin and Greek.
So it wasn't just about knowing historical facts. It was about having the philosophical tools to think about human nature, about virtue, about society.
Precisely. And this was just the expected standard for leadership, right up until the mid-20th century. So you have this incredibly stable structure. The general population holds the Christian cultural belief, and the elite has the classical philosophical framework to guide it.
A powerful combination.
It's the definition of a stable civilization. He calls it the Christian-Humanist tradition. And humanist here specifically means that green philosophical heritage brought into the fold by thinkers like Augustine and Erasmus.
Okay, so that's the structure. Now for the vanishing act. Kinneging says, let's fast forward just 50 years. From 1950 to the year 2000, what's left?
A void. His conclusion is stark. He says, so good as nothing remains of either pillar. The Christian faith, he says, has largely retreated into these small, isolated enclaves. And that classical formation of the elite, it's basically gone from the university curricula.
So the entire intellectual and moral infrastructure that defined the West for 2,000 years was basically wiped out in 2 generations.
That's his diagnosis. And we're left with what he calls a novum, a total novelty. The society we live in now is structurally ungrounded. It's a massive social experiment, and he argues that this void is the real root cause of that feeling of chaos and confusion you mentioned at the start.
Okay, so when that foundation vanished, something had to rush in and fill that massive space.
It had to.
And the most obvious candidate to replace God and that whole Christian cosmology was science.
Yes, science, with a capital S. The method, and more importantly, the prestige of modern science, supplanted the old faith as the ultimate explanation for everything.
But science, by its very nature, it deals with what you can measure, what you can observe and repeat. It can tell you how something works, but it can't tell you why. It doesn't do purpose.
And that's the core of the problem. That's why the replacement created so much uncertainty. Science is a tool, an amazing tool, but it's not a moral framework.
Right.
So as Kinneging points out, once you remove that old cosmic framework, that idea of God or the good that gave everything its place, the raw fundamental question just comes roaring back.
Why are we here?
Why are we here?
Yeah.
And there's no ready answer. And that, he says, is what creates the unheimisch, that unsettling, strange, unhomely feeling that just pervades modern life.
So let's go back to the moment this all started, the Enlightenment in the 17th and 18th centuries. How did they attack those pillars? What was their new definition of a human being?
The Enlightenment's approach was fundamentally reductive. They boil it down to 2 possibilities. The human being is either a machine
Or an animal.
or an animal. That's it. And the most influential voice for that man-is-machine idea was probably Thomas Hobbes.
Right, with his book Leviathan.
Exactly. And Hobbes lays out the modern view rooted in pure hedonism.
Yeah.
I mean, if you strip away the soul, you strip away divine purpose, what's left?
It's just a mechanism.
An organism driven by mechanical desires. And so the meaning of life becomes incredibly simple and stark. For Hobbes, it's just Live as long as you possibly can and satisfy as many of your desires, your Begierden, as you can.
We're basically just pleasure machines.
We're pleasure machines, programmed to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. And the primary instrument for achieving that,
Technology.
technique becomes the new savior. If life is just a series of problems to be solved to avoid suffering and get more pleasure, then technological progress is the only real goal.
This sets us up perfectly for what Kinneging sees as the huge intellectual mistake of that whole era.
A huge mistake, yeah.
Yeah.
So modern physical science, you've got Galileo, Newton. It was an undeniable revolution. They developed tools like calculus and new ways of observing the heavens that were just light years beyond what the ancients could do.
No question.
But that success, which was real, led to this colossal philosophical error. A non sequitur, he called it.
Which,
Because the moderns were better than the Greeks and Romans at physics and astronomy, they just assumed, illogically, that they were superior in all areas of knowledge.
including morality, politics, and understanding human nature.
Exactly. They thought that because they'd figured out planetary motion, they could just throw out Aristotle's ideas on virtue. They wrongly junked all of that classical human wisdom.
It sounds like a kind of, I don't know, a childish arrogance to confuse understanding how a comet moves with understanding why a person should be courageous.
It was a monumental error, and it totally changed our relationship with the past. Up until the Newtonian Revolution, Western thinkers saw their ancestors, especially the Greeks and Romans, as the majors, the greater ones.
You studied them to gain wisdom.
You did. People looked at Roman roads and aqueducts with awe because in many cases they couldn't replicate them. It fostered a sense of humility.
And the scientific non sequitur just flips that on its head.
Completely. The ancestors instantly become the minors, the lesser ones, and this gives birth to the modern progression myth.
The faith in progress.
The unwavering, almost religious faith in progress. The default assumption that we are automatically better, wiser, more moral than our predecessors just because we live later.
And that faith is everywhere today. It's behind a lot of tech utopianism, the idea that any tradition is automatically outdated just because it's old.
It functions as a secular religion. And it's dangerous because it absolves us of the need to actually study history or tradition. It creates that profound disconnect Kinneging is talking about. We confuse our technological superiority with moral or anthropological superiority.
And his argument is that in that second category, we've actually gone backwards because we threw away the best instruction manual we had.
That's it, exactly.
So this scientific revolution sets the stage. If humans are just complex machines, then we should be able to study them scientifically.
Right, and that takes us to the late 18th, early 19th centuries and the birth of what we call the modern human sciences.
Sociology, psychology, behavioral economics.
All of them. And they were founded with this one very clear goal: to imitate the methods of natural science. They wanted the same objective, quantifiable clarity that physics had.
Which explains why they're so obsessed with statistics, data, clinical trials, trying to apply that to the messy, subjective world of human emotions and societies.
That's it. They adopted the method, hoping to get the same kind of predictive power. They wanted a science of man that could solve social problems the way physics solves engineering problems.
Okay, so this whole project has been running for about 200 years now, so we have to ask the critical question Kinneging poses. What has it actually delivered? After all that time, all that research, what's the result?
And his conclusion is, well, it's deliberately provocative. It's stark. He says the answer is nothing.
Nothing.
Zero. He says the entire project failed because it yielded no insight into man. He sees it as a completely failed intellectual endeavor.
Wow. Okay, that is a severe critique. That's going to raise some hackles because these fields dominate our universities, our culture. Why is he so harsh?
He justifies it with a direct comparative test. He basically forces you to ask, where is the deeper wisdom? He says, take any standard modern psychology textbook, the kind you get in a first-year university course,
Okay.
and put it on a table next to Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics.
And he doesn't see the ethics as just some old philosophy text. He sees it as a psychological handbook.
A rigorous psychological handbook. Aristotle defines human happiness eudaimonia, or flourishing, not as a feeling, but as the active exercise of our highest abilities, reason, and virtue over a full life.
He's giving a roadmap.
A roadmap grounded in a realistic understanding of human purpose, artelos. He analyzes the passions, anger, fear, pleasure, not as diseases to be cured, but as raw material to be shaped by habit into good character.
And when you put that 2,300-year-old text next to a modern one,
Kinneging says it's not even a contest. The Nicomachean Ethics is infinitely better, infinitely more realistic, and contains infinitely more truth about who we are as human beings. The ancient text tells you how to live a good life. The modern one mostly tells you how to describe your neuroses.
And the ultimate symbol of this modern failure for Kinneging is probably the concept that became the holy grail of modern psychology. The idea popularized by Abraham Maslow, the top of his pyramid, self-unfolding or Zelfant-pluing.
Yes. This is the bedrock of modern therapy culture. The modern hypothesis for the meaning of life is basically this. You are here to discover your authentic self, be true to yourself, and unfold all of your inner potential.
Which sounds great. I mean, who doesn't want to do that? It feels very empowering.
And that's exactly the problem, according to Kinneging. It's enormously appealing because it caters directly to our natural egocentrism, the focus on me. But it gives this huge warning, and it's central to the whole tradition he's defending. He says, truth is not always pleasant, and what is pleasant is often untrue.
So this idea of self-unfolding is intellectually dishonest because it's just too pleasant, too easy.
In a way, yeah. He calls it egocentrism that has been polished with a kind of therapeutic, even pseudo-religious shine. It lets you put yourself first, but you get to frame it as a noble, virtuous quest. It's what he cynically calls deugden, which is a Dutch term, a sort of like virtuous signaling or moral showmanship.
It sounds good, it feels good, but it's a distraction from the actual hard work of building character that Aristotle or the Christian tradition would demand.
Exactly. And to understand where this idea even comes from, we have to look at the movement that was a reaction against that cold Enlightenment machine view.
We're talking about Romanticism.
Romanticism, starting with someone like Jean-Jacques Rousseau in the 18th century.
Okay, so if the Enlightenment guys said man is a machine or an animal, what was the Romantic metaphor?
The metaphor of the tree. A human being is like a tree or a plant, an organic thing whose inner nature and talents just need to be allowed to grow and blossom free from any constraints.
Free from tradition, from social rules, even from reason sometimes.
Yes. The natural, unimpeded state is the good state. But if you follow that logic, who or what becomes the final judge of what is good?
The self.
The self becomes God. That's the ultimate consequence. It deposes the old transcendent God and puts the autonomous individual on the throne. Your feelings, your inner truth, your personal expression, that becomes the ultimate standard for everything.
Which leads us straight into modern therapy culture, which is built on this idea that if you can just heal your trauma, find your authentic self, you will become a better person.
And this is where Kinneging brings in his sharpest critique, drawing directly from Christian anthropology.
Yeah.
That tradition's very realistic, and some would say pessimistic, view of human nature.
Okay.
He says the idea of self-unfolding is only safe if you are already a completely good person.
But the whole point of that older tradition is that we're not. We're inherently flawed.
Exactly. In the Christian view, everyone is a sinner. We are born with these inherent destructive flaws. He points specifically to the 7 deadly sins, things like envy, greed, lust, and wrath.
So if those things are inside you and your main goal is to just unfold your inner nature.
And you're just giving free rein to the most destructive parts of your own character. You're unfolding your vices.
So the tradition demanded restraint, correction, discipline.
And Romanticism demands expression and validation. It's a total inversion. Those flaws aren't meant to be unfolded. They're meant to be fought against, restrained, and overcome through constant, difficult effort.
He even goes after the modern idea of trauma healing, doesn't he? He has this fascinating story about his uncle.
He does. His uncle was a soldier in Indonesia after World War II, saw horrible things. But when he came back to civilian life, he made a rule for himself. He would never, ever speak about it.
He just repressed it.
He repressed it. He focused entirely on his work, became a very successful accountant, built a family, and lived a long, happy, very functional life, dying peacefully in his late 90s. Kinneging's point is that sometimes the traditional way letting things rest, focusing on duty, not dwelling on the past, is actually healthier.
That goes against everything we're told today about processing your trauma.
Everything. And he makes an even more controversial historical claim. He suggests that the epidemic of severe post-traumatic stress disorder we saw after the Vietnam War was, in many cases, actually caused or made much worse by the mandatory therapy sessions they forced on the veterans.
Oh, so.
Because the constant guided reliving of the worst moments, he argues, didn't heal the trauma. It reinforced it. It etched it deeper into their psyche, making it worse.
So the therapeutic model which was meant to help, might have actually intensified the suffering by forcing that constant self-focus instead of a focus on an active, purposeful life.
That's his conclusion. And that's why he ultimately calls Romanticism perverse, because it makes the self the absolute center of gravity. He says, look at something like a marriage. It only works if you're willing to abandon the self, to constantly make sacrifices for the other person. That's a concept straight out of that old Greek and Christian tradition of duty and commitment.
Right, because if you're always busy with your own self-unfolding, healing your inner child, you literally have no time or energy left for the other person.
There's no room. The self takes up all the space.
And this focus on the autonomous, unfolding self, it ends up defining our entire moral system today. Once the old pillars are gone, what's the new foundation?
Kinneging defines it very clearly. It's the core liberal dogma. As long as you do not harm another person, and as long as everything is based on consent, you can do whatever you want.
Individual freedom plus the harm principle.
That's it. And it simplifies morality dramatically. The question is no longer the complex, traditional one, is this action good for my soul? Is it virtuous? Does it align with human purpose?
It just becomes, is it legal, and did everyone agree to it?
A purely transactional question. And for Kinneging, the classic example that exposes the emptiness of this is prostitution.
Because in a place like the Netherlands, it's legal.
It's legal because it fits the paradigm perfectly. If a woman voluntarily chooses to sell her body, it's not seen as a moral issue. It's just a market transaction.
Or from the romantic liberal view, you could even argue it's a form of self-unfolding if she claims it empowers her.
You could. And to show just how crazy this logic gets, Kinneging loves to bring up this one piece of culture, a sketch from a Dutch comedy show called Newsier.
And it's a perfect reductio ad absurdum.
A devastating one.
Okay.
So the scene is a young girl with her parents at a career counselor's office. The counselor does this whole assessment of the girl's talents.
Okay.
And the results come back. Her top skills are, she's very social, she's physically strong, she has a great sense of style, she's service-oriented, and she's very skilled in sexual acts.
Uh-oh. So the objective, data-driven career path is
Prostitute, or sex worker, as they say. And the brilliance of the sketch is how the parents react. At first, they're horrified. But the counselor calmly walks them through the modern logic. And they eventually come around rationalizing it by saying,
as long as my daughter is happy and can unfold herself.
As long as she's happy and unfolding herself, then it must be a good choice. It just perfectly shows that when happiness and authenticity are your only moral criteria, society loses the ability to say that some choices are inherently degrading or bad. The logic leads you to an insane conclusion.
So what's the traditional counter-argument? Why isn't it just a harmless transaction?
Because the antique and Christian tradition had a very clear purpose for sex. It was understood, in the nature of things, to be part of a loving, permanent relationship between a man and a woman, specifically for the purpose of creating and lovingly raising children.
A purpose that requires commitment, sacrifice, responsibility, all the things a transaction leaves out.
All of it. And this goes back to Kinneging's core view of humanity. We are not just animals.
We are the metaxu.
It's the metaxu, a term from Plato, the middle being. We are positioned right between the divine, or the good, and the animal. We have animal passions, for sure, but we also have reason and spirit. We can sink to a bestial level, but the whole point of morality is that we ought not to. Our conscience isn't just social conditioning. He calls it a cosmic voice, telling us what we ought to do to be noble.
So when modern society makes laws based only on consent, it's stripping away that whole metaphysical purpose and basically giving us permission to live at that lower bestial level while calling it freedom.
And calling it autonomy. Precisely.
So we've laid out the problem, the void, the failure of the modern substitutes. And I think this leaves me with a really profound question. You can see the logic, you can see the absurdity of the self-unfolding model, but what do you do?
Yeah.
For a lot of people listening, they're not necessarily religious. They're these intellectual lost souls, and they're looking for a way out of the confusion. What does Kinneging actually prescribe?
He offers a clear intellectual path. And it starts by correcting a huge modern misunderstanding. The idea that faith and reason are opposites.
The science versus religion debate.
Yeah. He says true faith is only good if it's a reasonable conclusion that you arrive at through hard study and deep understanding. He warns us not to fall for the Enlightenment caricature of Christianity, the kind of thing Voltaire would write to ridicule it without ever seriously engaging with it.
His point is that most people today reject a version of Christianity they've never actually studied.
Cartoon version. They've never wrestled with the huge intellectual depth of the broad church tradition, the Orthodox, the Catholic, the Protestant thinkers.
And he puts a lot of emphasis on St. Augustine.
For him, Augustine is the key. He calls him the real founder of Christianity as a coherent intellectual system. Augustine took all these disparate texts and synthesized them into an orthodox tradition that guys like Aquinas and Calvin later built on. And the crucial part is, Augustine was a Platonist. He married the spiritual narrative to the philosophical rigor of the Greeks.
So that synthesis is there from the very beginning.
It's baked in. So when you ask, where do I find the answer to why am I here? Kinneging's recommendation is simple. Go back and study the great books of that Christian-Humanist tradition. He argues their authors understood life and the human condition far better than we do.
And that tradition gives a very clear answer, rejecting both hedonism and egocentrism. It says we have to focus our lives on three things: the true, the good, and the noble.
The foundation is the true, the constant effort to figure out how things really work, to find objective reality. We see how vital this is in law courts, in science, in public debate. He points to all the confusion during the COVID period as a perfect example of what happens when a society loses its grip on what is true.
And from the true flows the good.
It has to. You can't act rightly if your picture of reality is wrong. And the good starts simply. Treat people well, don't lie, don't steal, don't cheat. But it's a never-ending effort. Because we are flawed, you can never be self-satisfied. You always have to be striving.
And finally, the noble, which connects morality to purpose.
The noble is about pursuing virtue and using your talents to their fullest. He gives this great anecdote about a man who retires at 60 with a big pension and then spends 30 years just consuming, traveling, eating, drinking, doing nothing constructive for his family, his community, or his own mind.
And Kinneging's judgment on that is?
He says simply, this is not good. We are given talents and we have a duty and obligation to use them. To waste your potential on simple self-indulgence, even if it's consensual and harms no one, is a failure of human purpose.
It sounds like a constant struggle, not a one-time decision. This leads to the idea of the inner struggle, or what he calls Beckering or metanoia.
Yeah, metanoia literally means to change one's mind or make an inner turn. And he defines the human condition as this constant tension. We're always trying to move toward the good and the noble, which is there, but our selfish desires and vices are always pulling us back to the self, which is here.
So the essential human effort is just that constant daily attempt to make that turn away from yourself and toward reality, toward others, toward the good.
It's a lifelong philosophical and moral discipline.
Okay, so he provides this path for the individual, which is quite powerful. But at the societal level, he remains pretty pessimistic about where we're headed. What's the biggest existential threat he sees on the horizon?
The biggest threat isn't just the moral void. It's that void combined with our blind, unchecked technological faith.
Because technology is a massive power amplifier. It lets one person control or destroy millions.
Exactly. He points to Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, which was written way back in the 1930s, as being this chillingly accurate prophecy.
Right.
Huxley saw that the real threat wasn't going to be violent oppression, but technological comfort. A world engineered to eliminate all pain and offer endless distraction, leading to a life that's totally shallow and meaningless. Kinneging said, look around. Much of that has already come true.
And the most terrifying immediate threat he highlights now is artificial intelligence. He calls it one of the greatest dangers humanity has ever faced.
And he sees the threat as twofold. First is what he calls the de-souling of man. If AI can do all our complex thinking for us, analysis, strategy, even creating art, he fears we'll just outsource our minds.
The temptation to just let the machine do it will be too great.
It will be overwhelming. And it could lead to a future where humans are only capable of very rudimentary thinking. If you stop exercising your intellect, that's striving for the true, your capacity for the good and the noble just withers away.
And the second threat from AI
is oppression. Pure and simple. This immense machine knowledge will be used by those in power who are, of course, still subject to all the old human sins of greed and lust for control, to suppress and enslave the majority. He points to the social credit systems and mass surveillance already happening in China as the proof of concept. This is already here.
So it's a grim picture. The romantic desire for self-fulfillment plus the hedonistic reliance on technology creates the perfect storm for a comfortable, total tyranny.
A soft tyranny of convenience where the hard work of virtue is replaced by the ease of algorithmic control.
And yet, despite all of his intellectual pessimism about where society is going, you said he remains personally hopeful. How does he square that? Where does that hope come from?
His hope comes directly from the tradition he's defending. He holds on to the belief that human creativity and intellect is our greatest capital, and, crucially, that the best in man comes out under the most difficult circumstances.
So maybe this period of chaos is actually necessary, a kind of shock to the system to wake people up from their comfortable illusions.
It could be. The failure of all the modern substitutes is becoming so obvious that our inherent human desire for the true, the good, and the noble is still there, waiting. It's ready to be reawakened when things get hard enough. The struggle, for him, is constant, and the need for that inner turn is eternal.
So to wrap this up, we've gone through the collapse of this 2,000-year-old tradition. We've looked at the central mistake of the Enlightenment, and we've dissected the failures of modern psychology and this whole self-unfolding idea.
And if we had to boil down the key takeaway from Kinneging's perspective, it's that most people today are completely ignorant of their own foundational texts. They don't know the Bible, they haven't read Plato or Aristotle, they're rejecting an entire intellectual inheritance without ever having actually studied it.
And instead, they're accepting these easy, modern answers, which he calls Kinderbabel.
Childish talk.
Yeah.
Simplified therapeutic ideas that feel good but tell you nothing true about the actual difficulty and complexity of being human.
So if the wisdom we need to navigate our crazy, technological, morally confusing future isn't new, if it already exists, written down thousands of years ago in texts that are far more realistic, that leaves a pretty direct question for you, the listener.
The question is, what practical steps do you need to take to break free from the Kinderbabel of modern thought and to access that more robust, more mature, more realistic view of the human condition?
The knowledge to find that anchor isn't some new discovery. It's a commitment to going back and studying the great minds who, he argues, understood us better than we understand ourselves. We encourage you to start that study now.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.